Part of my research here with the CSIRO, the Commonwealth Scientific and Research Organization, was around the impact of kangaroos versus the impact of sheep. It wasn't so much the difference between a kangaroo and a sheep. The sheep are a bit larger, so they eat a bit more. The impact of the total number of mouths. There was some thinking that, well, a kangaroo has a large foot and they hop along and they don't chip up the ground quite as much. That's a subtle secondary impact. Yes, you'll see sheep tracking back and forth and creating a desert around a water hole, around a trough or a small farm dam. The management challenge is first and foremost the number of mouths. Kangaroos have hard teeth, sheep and cattle have hard teeth. It's a secondary issue and impact around the number of tracks going back and forth. And that's a localized impact. So again, you can see in Australia, again, this very patchy nature. You can see localized areas of high impact degradation. A lot of that's historical, some of it's poor management. But the bigger, more subtle impact is the number of mouths that are just constantly eating away with a critical cover, vegetation cover to conserve our ancient and fragile soils.
A lot of the detailed research suggests that kangaroos generally utilise different food sources within the environment, but that becomes really critical when the environment's getting very dry and the feed is getting scarce. Then the sheep and the kangaroos will tend to be utilised and compete for the same resources. So it depends a little bit who you talk to. The pastoralists will say kangaroos are always competing, whereas the scientific research suggests that they only really compete when the feed is getting very scarce heading into a drought, say.
In the beginning of a drought event, it will make the animal population gather in places where there's still water or feed left, so therefore it actually would make the harvester's job more easy because we don't have to drive as far and the animals are already gathered in numbers in places where there is feed and water for them. As the drought becomes more severe, as it does with our domestic stock, food dwindles, water dries up in dams and things like that, surface water dries up, so therefore those populations of kangaroos suffer the same as any domestic stock in a drought. They have no feed. Those that don't feed and don't drink die, and that's just a hard reality. That's no different in nature where we have no sustainable management practices in place on domestic stock or wild animals.
I think it's probably more acute because of our use of the land for sheep grazing, and that land is now grazed much lower than it would have been, and so when you go into a drought the lack of feed is far more pronounced, and probably the increase in feed is more pronounced when the rainfall is good. So we've created a less stable system, and the kangaroo populations are responding probably with a less stable dynamic in their population. So I think it's a fairly strong argument. Certainly when kangaroo populations are high and feed levels are low, the kangaroos get starved. They move in vast numbers over large distances and descend on available feed. That causes a huge amount of problems in urban and semi-urban areas, and also in farmers, property owners who have destocked early in a drought to conserve their landscape and to try and make sure that they're not completely eating it out. Then they get an influx of kangaroos and all of their good intentions are wiped out by that. So there's a whole mixture of reasons why a cull, why a control of population is necessary and desirable.
An animal that can't drink is dead in a week or two when the temperatures get to 115. Now it's, as they eat out their feed supply that's been built up in the wet periods, it's a question of managing to reduce their populations through harvesting rather than through starvation.
And if we don't harvest them, and if the numbers get very high, what's going to happen is that then we'll have not just hundreds of thousands, but millions of kangaroos dying from starvation. And I think I'd rather have a situation where we're harvesting 10, 15, 20% of them every year, keeping the numbers within reasonable bounds, so that the total number of kangaroos that die from starvation is much less. I think that's an animal welfare positive. So, I mean, I think I'm on absolutely rock solid ethical grounds, and I'd be happy to defend it anywhere.
In the present situation where kangaroos I believe need to be managed in certain areas, and they are being culled, and I've nothing against using the meat and skin products. But it's not my brand of conservation. It's something that I don't get involved in.